Hello everyone, welcome to Poliglotar, the second day now. I hope you are having a great time. And we're going to have a talk now in English from Elena Tereshchenkova. She lives in Saint Petersburg in Russia, and she's going to talk about an unconventional approach to becoming a literary translator. And she describes the talk like this. If you have always wanted to translate books and are not afraid of challenges, this talk might give you some fresh ideas on how to get started. Learn how to make your dream come true by becoming a publisher. And I'm going to present Elena now. She lives in Saint Petersburg, Russia, and has been working as an English to Russian freelance translator for the past 11 years, specializing in marketing and creative translation. In 2017, she plucked up enough courage to pursue her dream of becoming a literary translator. In the early 2018, her lifelong passion for psychology and entrepreneurial spirit helped her successfully publish the Russian translation of Dr. Lindsay Gibson's book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. She's also known as the co-host of Translators On Air, a live talk show for freelance translators. And she has already interviewed me a few months ago. It was very nice. And now I invited her to come to Poliglotar to talk about translation as well. So please, Elena, you may start.
Thank you, Giuliano, for the introduction. Before I tell you a few words about my background and how I got into publishing books, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference and Giuliano in particular for giving me this opportunity. I believe that we live in an amazing time when it's probably easier than it has ever been to make your dreams come true, and I hope that my story today will give you some fresh ideas on how you can do it if you want to translate books, and will inspire you to pursue your dreams probably in some other areas as well. I will also want to thank you all who have gathered here for this early morning session, and I hope you'll hear something useful. I have been working as a freelance translator since 2005, so it's actually more than 11 years. It's almost 13 years. And when I just started out, I translated most of the texts that came my way, like I guess a lot of people do. I probably needed that period of time to just understand what kind of things I like to translate. And over the years, I started to specialize more in marketing and creative texts. I localized touristic portals, translated blogs, also worked on app localization and advertising, and I really loved my job. But I had always wanted to translate books. I first had this idea that I want to translate a book when I came across Maren Keyes' books while I was still studying at the university. Maren Keyes is an Irish novelist, and I really loved her books because she writes about life, about love, about different relationship problems, and how people get it. And at some point, I thought my friends and family who didn't read English, don't read English. So when I decided to write a bucket list in late 2007, translating one of Maren Keyes' books was on that list. But life is such a thing that it's not enough to write something on your bucket list. You also have to do something about it. And at that time, I didn't do much to make that dream come true. A couple of years later, I actually found one of Maren Keyes' books in a bookstore. It was translated into Russian, but I didn't really like the quality of that translation. Again, it's probably easier to criticize someone than to do something myself. And when I saw that the book, one of many, had already been translated, I somehow decided that I'm not going to do that anyway. But still, that idea of translating books and sharing something with people, it was somewhere on the back burner. And but over the years, the kind of books that I wanted to translate actually changed. Around that time, around 2007, I became interested in psychology. And I got interested in nonfiction books. From my own experience, I know that some of these books can really help you change your life. And of course, you also have to do something. Just reading a book is not enough. But on the other hand, these books, I mean non-fiction books and books on psychology, can really give you some food for thought and can help you some things that you haven't seen previously. So when I started again to first more actively think about the idea of becoming a literary translator in 2017, and probably late 2016, I knew that I wanted to translate nonfiction books. But first, before starting to pursue this idea to do something about that, I decided to try my hand at working on longer form content. Because although I have already been things that texts that required quite a bit like blog posts or probably advertising campaigns with some slogans and things like that. And I just wanted to get that feeling of translating something that required more consistency. So I came up with an idea for a side project, which was called I Love Mondays. And it was a project where I translated articles about motivation, managing your time, pursuing the things you wanted to pursue in life, making your dreams come true, and things like that, and sent them out to a mailing list. And I decided to do that every week. So that project, I launched that project in 2015. So was in October 2015. I built a small website where people could read nonfiction books. And I could also start gathering some audience, some people who were interested in the subject that I was also interested in. And actually, when I started that project, I was already thinking about translating books. And at that moment, I still didn't know how it all would come together. But I read over and over and over again on the internet that if you want to sell books or publish books, you need an audience. And at that time, I actually didn't think that I would publish anything myself. But I thought, okay, so if I want to have to do something with books, I need to have an audience. So why not start building it now? And I did that. That project went on, as I said, for 2 years. And I stopped sending out the articles in 2017. Probably because the subjects that were the main subjects of that newsletter, they were not the subject that I was interested in at that moment. And I think that it's okay to change over time. So since my interests became a bit different, and I didn't want to continue translating articles on those same topics, I thought that it might be a good idea to just say goodbye to that project. But I'm grateful. I'm very glad that I did it, because I learned a few things. I learned how to start building an audience. I learned how to be consistent, and it all helped me later when I started that first project of publishing my first book, which seemed quite crazy when I was starting out. So when I understood that I really can consistently translate nonfiction book-like texts, and that it was something that I really wanted to do, something that brought me joy, I thought about ways of how I can start translating actual nonfiction books. And the first and most obvious way was to work with Russian publishers. So I thought about that, and there were two main pros of that approach. The first one was that I would only have to do what I know how to do, and that is to translate. And on the one hand, it was good, because it was within my comfort zone. I already understood that I like translating such texts, and it was enjoyable and, well, not always easy, but at least it was challenging in a good way. Another pro was that I wouldn't have to think about acquiring translation rights. And it's actually tightly connected with the first point that I mentioned. At that time, I didn't really know how I would go about acquiring translation rights for the books I was interested in. The only thing I knew was that American publishing houses, or British publishing houses, anyway, publishing houses that publish books in English, that is my main working language. They don't work with individuals. That was the only thing I knew. But there were quite a few downsides of working with Russian publishers. The first one was that I would have to either translate what the publisher suggested, or I would have to spend my time and energy to persuade them to buy rights for the books that were interesting to me. And there were no guarantees that after I would persuade them to buy those translation rights, they would commission the translation from me. Because it's quite understandable, because first they know what quality those translators provide, and those translators agree to work for the money that publishers are ready to pay. And that is the second downside. They pay, the payment is very low. I'm not quite sure how translators who translate books for a living and work with publishers make it. Actual approach, which is to have a day job and do book translations on the side, as a labor of love, actually, because what she got for that book translation wouldn't actually pay for a living. And another approach is to take on a lot of work. And we probably all know that if you take on a lot of work, at some point the quality becomes lower. And unfortunately, when I sometimes buy books that have been translated from other languages, which I sometimes have to do because I can read English and German. And if I want to read a book that was originally written in French, for example, I have to buy the translation. And the quality of the translation very often leaves much to be desired. And I think that it's actually the consequence of translators picking this second approach to their work and taking a lot of work. And another thing is that in spite of the low pay, it's quite difficult to get the foot into the door and start working with a publisher. I have that experience. I tried contacting one of the major publishers, and I got a test from them. I did the test, and they said that they pointed out some mistakes that I made in that translation. One of those mistakes was that there was a phrase, something like from left to right, and I translated it as from right to left. So I was just inattentive, and all other I wouldn't even call them mistakes. They were just some suggestions that were not to the taste of that publisher. And I honestly believe that in a publishing house, in any publishing house, even in my small boutique publishing house, there are editors, and it's actually their job to bring the text to the standards of this or that publisher. And I think that my inattentiveness was due to the fact that I knew about the low pay, and it's probably, I know that I'm not the only one because I discussed it with my colleagues. I know that when it's probably not, I'm not very idealistic, I don't know, but I know that when I get low pay, I tend to work worse. It's not something I'm proud of, but I'm just like that. And so I just had to accept it and think of some other ways to start doing what I enjoy doing and wanted to do for a living. And the next idea that came to my mind was actually not starting to publish books myself, but to reach out to self-published authors. I know that I knew at the time that self-publishing was a thriving industry in the USA. There were a lot of people who published their books and became successful and had audiences in the US and other English-speaking countries. So I thought that it would be a great idea to reach out to those successful self-published authors and to offer them my services. And I did that. And I basically got two types of answers. Some of the authors were interested in self-publishing their work in Russian, but they were not ready to make the investment just yet. So they said that it's a good idea. They read my articles, my blog posts, which I published on my blog at wordsboutique.com for the self-published authors who were interested in publishing their work in Russia to get some idea about how they can do that. And so those authors said that they were interested in the project per se, but they were not ready to do it just yet. And other authors that I contacted, and I must say that the majority of them belong to this category, this latter category. They said that they didn't want to self-publish the translation and that they only wanted to sell the translation rights to their books. And some of them mentioned that they wanted to sell the translation rights to a publisher. So not to an individual translator, but to a publisher. And I remember that in late 2016, I was doing the redesign of my website at wordsboutique.com, and at the last moment, I decided that I wanted to target only self-published authors, and I actually did that redesign. And then there were two situations which made me become a publisher. The first one was a situation with guys called the Minimalists. You can just Google them. They write about minimalistic lifestyle, and they have a podcast. And I really liked their book called Everything That Remains. I didn't even like it. I literally fell in love with that book, and I wanted to share it with my friends and with other people in Russia who didn't read English. And I contacted the guys, and they said that they actually just want to sell the translation rights to their books, to their book. And I still didn't consider that option at that time. It was actually in September 2016. And then in January 2016, I contacted them again and decided to go that way where I would help them find a publisher and try to persuade them to hire me as a translator. It was because I really wanted to translate that book that I decided that I can do that labor much, even though the payment was low. And they said that they are actually already working process of discussing the deal. And I contacted that publisher right away, and I sent them, gave me permission to translate that book and share it with my friends. So I started doing that, and I sent the publisher those few first chapters that I had already translated. And the publisher said that they had considered this book, but decided that it's not a good fit for the Russian audience. And I was so amazed because I loved that book, and I knew that I couldn't be the only Russian-speaking person who would love that book too, as much as I did. And I thought that it was just a matter of marketing and a matter of finding that audience who would enjoy reading that book. But the thing was that a big publishing house didn't want to target those smaller niches of people who would be interested in reading that book. They just wanted to pick some books that they thought, that was one situation where I saw that in some aspects, it wouldn't be correct to say better, but there were some niches that were a good fit for me as a small publisher or as a translator who publishes the book translations that the books that she translates. And those niches were not good for bigger publishers. So in some way, I could compete with them by not actually competing with them. And the second situation was that one of the self-published authors who also has a podcast that I was regularly listening to announced in early 2017, announced on his podcast that although he had already, I think, 3 books that he had very successfully self-published, he decided that for his next book, he would find a publisher. And I remember that moment when I was listening to that podcast, and my first thought was, why are you going to do that? Why do you need that? What is it about traditional publishing that can be so attractive to someone who knows how to build an audience, who knows how to design a book cover, who knows how to do all the things that publishing a book entails? And so I just couldn't understand why would someone like that man whose name is Paul Jarvis, he has a great podcast as well. So I just couldn't understand why he would want to do that. And my second thought was, okay, then I'll become a publisher. Although he wasn't talking about Russian publishers, he was talking about American publishers. I thought that if I kept getting that answer that we want to work with a publisher, so I decided, okay, I will become a publisher then. And I actually started doing something in order to take that way and become a publisher. I won't talk about the formal side of it. I will just say that in Russia, it's quite easy to become a publisher. We don't need any special licenses. We just need to add a code we just need to inform our tax department that we now want to become a publisher, and that's about it. I don't know if it's the same in Brazil. I suppose it might be different, so I won't talk about the formal side of it. Instead, I will talk about why it's important to choose a niche. And I already touched upon that subject. It is important because if I want to publish the books that will be appealing to everyone, I will have to compete with publishers. And it's just not possible for me. At this stage, at least. Probably, I don't know, in 5 years' time, I will have the budget, a marketing budget, to promote my books the way big publishers do with theirs. But it's definitely, I definitely don't have this budget now, and I didn't have it when I was just when this whole thing of publishing a book was just an idea. So I knew I had to select a niche. Second reason for this is that as translators, we know a lot about specialization, and it's very much the same with book publishing, and in specialized or even not specialized at all, but for example, it's a book on time management. You have to know the language people in your country are using to talk about time management. Don't actually seem like a specialization when you first think about them. But actually every topic has its own, familiar with that. Yes, these are the two main reasons for selecting a niche. And again, I just want to emphasize how important it is in terms of promotion to know who you are talking to know who your reader is, to know who your audience is. And it was actually the reason why I decided to kill that I Love Mondays newsletter, is because it was a bit too broad for a niche where I could pick the books, because motivation, time management, pursuing your goals, these are quite broad topics in themselves, and people who are interested in them can be quite diverse. And actually, when we are talking to everyone, we're talking to no in particular. And there are a lot of for example, bloggers or newsletters that are targeted to a wider audience, and it's very difficult to stand out among them. And as a small publisher, I knew that basically my social media pages would be my main marketing tool. So I had to have a topic, a narrow topic. At the same time, the specialization couldn't be too narrow, because I knew that I had to choose something that would give me the opportunity to pick different kinds of books within the same area, within the same topic. And they had to be diverse enough for the people to be interested in them. So I decided to specialize in publishing books on psychology. Why psychology? I had been interested in the subject for years. I knew that there has been a big demand for such books because I knew people from that industry. I was in therapy as a client for quite some time, and actually at the time when I was starting this project, I took part in the work of a therapeutic group, and I discussed this idea with my group mates, and the leader of the group said that, and I didn't actually at that moment I didn't consider translating books on psychology, but the leader of that group said that actually there are a lot of books published in English on different subjects connected with psychology every year, and very few of them are translated into Russian. And many of those that are translated into Russian are of such low quality that it's difficult even to read them. And it was actually that aha moment that I had, and I understood that I could actually combine two of my lifelong passions into one, and study psychology and do translations at the same time, which seemed like a great idea. As I already mentioned, from my own experience, books on psychology could help people change their lives, and the idea of helping someone seemed very attractive to me too. And so when I knew what kind of books I wanted to translate, I developed a small process for choosing them. So first I went to Amazon.com and I just typed in some keywords that reflected things that I was interested in at that particular moment. And I narrowed my search by choosing the category books. And then I had, I don't know, a couple of hundreds, probably even thousands of books on psychology. Then I chose the books that had good ratings on Amazon. And because I thought that if those books helped a lot of people in the US and were popular among US readers, they would probably be popular among Russian readers as well. Then I started reading the descriptions of those books, and probably the first few pages, just to see whether I myself like that book or whether it's something that I would feel comfortable translating, because of course it's very important. We all do it when we get jobs from clients. We have to have a look at the text and to see if we will feel comfortable translating it, or if it will be challenging for us, but in a good way, or if it's just out of our reach at the moment. So then I had to, for those books that I was interested in and I felt that I could do a good job in Russia already, and some of them had been published and some of them hadn't. In the end, I made a list of 15 books that appealed to me, that had good ratings on Amazon and published in Russian yet. I also included a couple of books recommended to me by people who worked in the industry, psychological consulting. And so I got that list of 15 books. After that, I started contacting publishers and literary agents to find out whether the translation rights were free. Because even if the book hasn't yet been published, the translation rights might have already been sold to some other publisher. I didn't have to contact someone for all 15 books, because some of them were published by one publisher, and some different publishers were represented by the same literary agents. Some of my emails didn't get any reply. One publisher and one agent agreed to work with me. So it's possible in Russia, it's possible for publishers to work as sole proprietorships. The literary agent's office, they just probably couldn't understand that, because it's, I would say that it's not a widely spread thing for translators to become publishers themselves. So I don't blame them. And it's very important to learn that you will get a lot of negative responses. You will get a lot of no's, and that's okay. So it was something that I learned during that process, and I'm glad that I did, because it makes everything easier. Once you understand, things get much easier. So in the end, I had 2 books to choose from. So I translated the descriptions, made a survey where people could choose them and leave their email addresses in the end. Then I wrote an idea to become a publisher, published the link to this and asked my friends to share. to share the link to the survey. Again, some of them agreed, some of them didn't, and that's okay. In a month, I had a book that won the majority of the voices. And I had about 200 people on my mailing list. And it was time to start the crowdfunding campaign. Crowdfunding is a way in different projects where so people pay money, and in return I offer them some rewards. In my case, those rewards were limited to the book, but actually to you can go to kickstarter.com and type in translation or book publishing and find some very interesting projects. I found their translating Armenian novel into English and some Russian science fiction stories. People also wanted to translate them into English and publish them. And even such authors as Seth Godin also gather money for publishing their books via crowdfunding. I see that I don't have much time left, so I have to go a bit faster. I made quite a few mistakes during that crowdfunding campaign, but they all can be the main mistake was that I wasn't active enough or time to gather the amount of money that I needed for the book to at the people as you can about your project. It more traditional pre-order, you still have to contact a lot of people, and it might be hard for us translators. This crowdfunding campaign definitely was something where I had to go to get out of my comfort zone. There are a few moments, a few things. First, it's familiar with the subject, and I would say that you should love the subject that the book is about, because why do it if you don't enjoy doing it in the first place? You can just work for regular clients and not get into something that requires quite a bit of effort of this particular kind of text, because you can't really use CAT tools for to speed up literary translation. You have, and it might go a bit slower or a bit faster than your regular work. For example, I can translate more more words per hour when I'm translating a book, but I can work fewer hours per day. And it's important to know before you start that project. And you should also plan for emergencies. Then publishing a book is an endeavor which you can't do alone. If you want the book to be good, you have to have a team of at least 3 people: editor, proofreader, and these are 2 different people, and designer who will take care of the interior design of the book and the book cover. The way I found these people was I actually, a lot of people contacted me during the crowdfunding campaign. For me, it was important not to take advantage of those offers and pay for the services, because as I mentioned, I know that I'm not alone who doesn't do a good job when they're for low pay. Actually, working for free is another story, and if I'm passionate about something, I can do free work, absolutely. But I wanted to build a team for my future projects as well, so I chose to pay those people their usual rates that they asked me for. We actually did a service exchange with a designer. I translated a book for her, and she did the cover design and the interior book design for me. So it was okay too. And then when I actually printed the first print run ready, I had to distribute the book, and there are at the moment I have three main ways of distribution of the book. The first website, I built it myself, but I know that for the next book I will have to update it, and I'm going to hire a web designer for that. The main advantage of this way of distribution is that I get all the money, but I have to handle all the work. So I have to pack the book, I have to take it to the post office or to courier service office, and you have to plan for that work as well. Then there are this way. I haven't tried out this way of distribution yet, because they take up to 40% of the book price for their services, but they take care of sending the books to customers and such. And then there are small specialized online stores of that crowdfunding campaign that I did for the book. And then there are offline stores. It's not so easy to start working with big offline bookstores in Russia, because they are not too keen to work with sole proprietorships. I don't know if the situation spread about the book. And I will just say a couple of words about promoting the book. It's I would say that I did the majority of the promotion during the crowdfunding campaigns, and although I have already said that I didn't as much as I could, and I really believe it, even the things that I did were enough to start. And some publications started to contact me themselves. For example, some YouTube bloggers, some Instagrammers, and even there's probably such a magazine, a printed magazine called Psychologist. I think it's international. It might be that you have it in Brazil as well. So the editors of the editor of that magazine contacted me and asked me to send in the book for review. So just to sum it all up a bit, and to speak about the results that I got, as of today, I have sold 1,700 copies of the book. I started to sell it in March 2018, in March this year. I got enough money to live off that book and to buy translation and publication rights for 2 next books and for an additional print run of this book. So if you really want to become a literary translator, I think it's becoming a publisher is something that you could consider. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that you heard something useful, and I'm ready to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Elena. And so people, do you have any questions for her? So, Elena, I have a question. Perhaps the book is very known in the original country, but not in the other country, perhaps because the translation was bad or because the culture is different. And when you talk about promoting the book or the translation, what do you have to promote that author or the translator, or you as a publisher, or everything?
It's a great question. I'm sure that sometimes the book in the translation is not as popular in the target language as it had been popular in the original language because of the translation quality. And actually, the translation quality was the most important thing for me. When I'm promoting the book, I'm promoting the book because the Lindsay Gibson, the author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, was not familiar to Russian readers at all. I was not familiar to readers as publisher either. But the book, I really believe that this book could help people solve their problems in relationships with their parents. And it's a topic that is dear to many people. And so I didn't think I didn't think that it would make much sense to promote the author and to just tell who she is. Of course, I mentioned that. Because it's important to know that someone who has written the book is an expert in the subject. So I certainly mentioned that. But it was important to promote the book itself. So I wrote about, I wrote articles for some blog portals about the contents of the book. Okay. So I think it might be. I know what you mean by promoting the author, but I'm afraid that a small publisher won't get to translate a book by the author that can be promoted in order to sell the book, if you know what I mean. So we have to pick really good books that would appeal to people, that will be useful to people if we're talking about nonfiction books, or that would transport people into other worlds if we're talking about fiction books. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, I have one more question, but let me ask if someone else has one as well. No? So my last question is, you said that it's difficult because of the low pay. What do you do in that case? Do you have another kinds of jobs, or do you translate also technical stuff to compensate the money?
Do you mean people who work with publishers, or just me?
No, I don't know. Perhaps your case as a literary translator. Do you also translate technical texts to have more income?
At the moment, I have one regular client uh, who doesn't provide a very big workload, and some clients who just come to me, I don't know, once a couple of months, and my main stream of income is the income from the book. But being a publisher, I can set the price for the book that can cover my living costs and help me publish other books. And it's just a question of the price for the book is probably for the book I published is probably a bit higher than the average market price. But since people are buying that book, I assume that the price is justified. And I know that it's justified because of the amount of work that I put in and because of the way I spend my money. I know where it goes. So, yeah. And it's also connected with promotion of the book again, and with the ability to show people the value that the book can bring them.
Okay, Elena. So thank you very much for having accepted the invitation to come to Poliglotar and talk about literary translation. And I hope to see you again very soon.
Thank you for listening to me. I hope I could inspire some of you to try something new. Thank you, Giuliano.
Thank you very, very much. Goodbye and have a nice day.
Bye. You too.